It's OTA day for Marvel Snap Gamers, and Second Dinner is taking a crack at some of the most powerful and popular cards in the metagame, such as Fenris Wolf, Cannonball, and Juggernaut. Let's go ahead and dive on into what they're doing to those cards, as well as buffs that we have in store now. Fenris Wolf is getting a big downgrade this week, going from a 2/3 up to a 3/4, while retaining its activate that resurrects your opponent's highest power discarded or destroyed card on its side. Second Dinner notes that one of their primary goals in this change is reducing the power level and consistency of the turn 2 Fenris Wolf into turn 3 Negasonic Teenage Warhead that's fairly common among a variety of decks right now. The Fenris Wolf on 2 helps you get priority, so that way Negasonic can blow something up and then you instantly have stats. Past Warhead, there's also things like Gladiator, and then in the late game, things like Shang-Chi that allow Fenris Wolf to bring back a lot of big stats. Second Dinner calls out that they're hoping for this card to still remain powerful, but have a little bit more of an opportunity cost to play it, which I absolutely agree with. There's a huge difference between a card that costs 2 and 3 in Marvel Snap in general, with 3 energy cards often having a lot more powerful effects, which is more fitting for Fenris Wolf, which certainly has one of those. Another card that sees regular play alongside Fenris Wolf is Cannonball with Mercury, often winning the lane that it's in on the spot by blowing away your opponent's largest card and then providing its own stats as well. And then Fenris Wolf would clean up another lane for you in as well. Cannonball's getting a pretty big haircut, losing 25% of its points of power from a 5/8 down to a 5/6. This change does not surprise me in the slightest. This card's kind of been terrorizing the metagame for a little while since Mercury was added, and between the Fenris Wolf change plus this point adjustment, I'm hoping these two cards will be a little bit less common in the meta overall. Second Dinner goes on to justify their Juggernaut change, who's going from a 3/3 up to a 4/5 by noting that this is a card that they know is pretty frustrating to play against. They're making a sizable change to it. In particular, they're hoping that changing this from a 3 to 4 cost serves 2 primary goals. The first of this is it being a 4 energy play makes it more difficult to play on the last turn of the game alongside something else. So you have to really work for that type of effect if you want it. This hopefully encourages him to be played in the earlier turns of the game, making his effect less deterministic in the overall outcome. The second is that when he's played on turn 6 in a lot of games right now, he's often accompanied by Silver Surfer, and adjusting him from a 3 up to a 4 means that he's no longer going to benefit from that card, even if they are still played in the same decks. Next up, we have Fantasticar getting a pretty sizable haircut as well, going from 4/7 down to 4/5. Second Dinner starts by saying that they wanted to make changes incrementally, starting with the last OTA to the end of turn deck, given how large the change they made to Mr. Fantastic First Steps plus the Ghost rework were. They said they've seen the metrics on this archetype come down, but they're not quite where they want them to be just yet. So they're taking a points of power off of Fantasticar here to see if they can finally get this archetype into a place that they're happy with. I'm not super surprised to see another cut come to the end of turn archetype. I actually posted a highlight earlier this week talking about how I thought this deck was still one of the best in the game currently. I think part of that effect is simply that the dynamic that this end of turn archetype operates on is very different than a lot of other decks in Snap. It's one of the few decks in the game where you can't like Enchantress or Shang-Chi your way out of it, because it's making a lot of very mid-sized numbers. There's a lot of 7, 8s, 9s as opposed to the 10 and 12 plus that we see in a lot of other decks, and the handful of end of turn cards that do get really big like Thena and Havoc are often played out on the last turn of the game, never giving the opponent the window to interface them with something like Shadow King or Shang-Chi. Moving on from nerfs, we have 5 different cards getting buffed in today's OTA as well. The Mad Thinker is gaining a base point of power starting off as a 1/2, with Second Dinner noting they weren't sure what the average outcome of this card would be, but as so far it's become clear that the decks he is in aren't really finding success. Honestly, I'm not sure that 1 more point on this card is going to move the needle. I think the lack of this card's playability is more of a symptom of the metagame rather than his individual stats. While I'm sure if they made it a 3 or a 4 to start, it would eventually start seeing play. One of the core issues with 1-drops in Marvel Snap right now is that there's so many copies of Killmonger and even things like Elektra floating around in the metagame that it's hard to put resources into a 1 energy card like this that's just giving you numbers when the risk to reward ratio on them is just not particularly favorable. 2-point buff to Nightmare, going from a 3 -1 up to a 3 +1, who replaces the text of all cards in your hand with random text of other cards at the same cost. Second Dinner notes that they were intentionally cautious with this design when it first released, because while there's people that typically really love this type of effect, it's also one that makes it very difficult to keep track of what the exact game state looks like in Marvel Snap. So they wanted it to be playable like all cards, but they didn't want it to have an overwhelming metagame share. Given how the metrics look on it so far, they feel like it warrants a buff, and I think that that's probably fine. I also think there's a number of Nightmare decks that kind of mitigate his body in different ways, so he'll be neutral there, with this basically just raising the floor of how bad he is when his body has to stick around for you. Silver Surfer First Steps is getting a point of power up to 3/5. Hashtag justice for Cyclops. Second Dinner notes that this is another design they were initially a little bit cautious with because they didn't want to risk it being too powerful with their original Silver Surfer design, and seeing how the metrics for this card are playing out, they don't think that that is likely a concern, and I would be inclined to agree with them. They want to add a little bit more points of power to the card because this way she can be self-enabling for winning her own lane and getting her text to trigger. I think she's been fantastic in a number of Victoria, hand, and specifically Surge decks that I've played recently. I think this card is likely pretty playable, especially once more folks get their hands on it when it becomes available through Series 4 next month. Next up, we have Ghost Spider getting 1 point of extra power. Second Dinner calls out that there was obviously mixed feedback on their overall move rework last OTA, with Vulture going to 1 and Human Torch going up to 3. But as they promised, they're going ahead and making further adjustments to the move package to try and get them into a competitive and good spot. They also call out that their adjustments to Fenris Wolf and Cannonball will hopefully make it so there's a bit less mercury in the metagame, giving the move deck a little bit of organic breathing room as well. But they still wanted to give it a little bit of a direct buff after the last set of changes that they implemented. Finally, we have a non-stat line buff this week as well, with America Chavez now giving the top card of your deck +3 power. Second Dinner notes that +3 has been kind of a scary number to use in the past. Things like Silver Surfer or Galacta have been overtuned when they give that, but they also call out that America Chavez isn't a controlled ability. You're giving a random card on top of your deck this effect, and I think that'll be a good balancing mechanic for it. I'm inclined to agree with that. I think a Chavez at +2 was a card that felt pretty close to powerful in a few spots, and now her effectively being a flexible 1/5 that can have incredible upside with things like Sebastian Shaw, Brood, or Mr. Sinister honestly makes her a pretty appealing card to play. America Chavez with the fist bump variant is one of my favorite pieces of art in the game. I'm definitely looking forward to getting to play with this card again after mostly ignoring her for a while now. This definitely feels like a really solid OTA overall. I'm honestly surprised that they came at the Fenris Wolf Cannonball package as hard as they did, but I'm absolutely happy to see it as well. I'm also excited to get to play with America Chavez for the first time in a little while, like I mentioned. I would love to hear in the comments down below what you think of today's changes, and as always, if you enjoyed my breakdown on them, be sure to smash that like button. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any Marvel Snap game news updates like this, or deck list roundups while we'll be checking out how these cards are doing after the fact once we have some data to look at.